Well, good afternoon. My name is Nate Schutta. I'm part of the advocacy group at VMware. Best way to describe me is architect as a service. Someone called me that a few years ago, and I thought, yeah, that's a pretty good fit. You know, I'm an architect, I go places, I talk to people. I will admit I did sound the acronym out in my head, and I realized it may not have been intended as a compliment. But I am delighted to be here with my friend, my teammate, my colleague, the one and only Whitney Lee.
Hi, I'm Whitney. I'm a developer advocate at VMware. I'm good at creating simple explanations of technical concepts, and altogether, so YouTube Lightboard videos I've made have about 500,000 views. So these days I live and breathe cloud technologies, but I didn't always. Before I had joined tech, I had a career as a professional photographer.
So I've been in this software space a long time, and one of the things that you realize pretty quickly is projects don't always end the way we intended, and you can ask a good question, which is, why is failure so common? You know, now, some people would default to say, well, we must have made a bad technology choice. And that's possible, that does happen, but honestly, that's probably not the real issue at play here. I have a traditional computer science undergraduate degree, and I assure you that at least in my program, we did not talk about people. You know, we just ignored people. And then you get in the real world and you realize, oh, geez, every project is just a collection of people. I don't do anything on my own. I don't do anything that lasts 2 weeks or 3 months. And if you're like me, at some point in your career, you probably skipped a soft skills seminar because there had to be something better to do with your time. And many of us have learned to navigate these interpersonal waters largely through trial and error. And I guess that's okay. But clearly, for many of us, this doesn't come naturally. And more than a few of us get into this line of work because it allows us to sort of ignore or escape the kind of messy, human-y, interaction-y parts of this game. You know, a friend of mine has this great shirt, "People, not a big fan." And I actually, my wife got me a shirt for Christmas. It's got a cat drinking coffee, and it says, "That's what I do. I drink coffee and not a fan of people," or something to that effect. It's quite cute. I almost brought it on this trip, and I thought, no, I probably don't want to be that antisocial. I went for a walk last summer and couldn't help but take a picture of this person's car, you know, the antisocial social club. But then you get into our line of work and you realize as much as you wish you could ignore people, it does kind of come with the paycheck. Sorry about that. And we're getting like an impromptu concert from next door. This is fantastic. Now, there are a lot of patterns that we apply in software in terms of how we do design, architecture, et cetera. There's also patterns we can use for people. And there are things we can do that will help us be more successful with our projects, and that's what we're going to try to talk about today. This stuff actually can be fun for all of us. It doesn't always have to end in pain and sorrow. And in the same way that we've borrowed ideas from other industries, like, say, construction, you know, what do they call me? You know, architect. Why? Because, well, we have architects and we build buildings, and they draw lots of pictures, so we must need people who draw lots of pictures. You know, I always try to preface that I'm a software architect, not one of those building architects that can actually do something more useful. It turns out we can actually apply lessons from seemingly unrelated fields to our own.
And that's where I come in. When I first started in tech, I couldn't believe how much my photography knowledge came into play. Wait, that doesn't make sense. How does photography relate to software? The thing is, I wasn't just a photographer. I was a wedding photographer. And not only do weddings have a similar cadence and project life cycle, weddings involve a lot of people, and therefore a lot of personalities, egos, and emotions. As a wedding photographer, I became very skilled at selling a vision, demonstrating my competence quickly and deeply, setting expectations, making my clients feel heard and respected, communicating with kindness and with transparency, and delivering on my promises. During my time in tech, every one of these skills has directly translated to working with people on software projects.
It turns out we can just be teammates as opposed to adversaries. And if we do this right, everyone can feel heard, everyone can feel respected. We're trying to get this shared excitement, and we can only do that if we build trust. And that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today.
So with weddings, the first opportunity I had to build trust and demonstrate knowledge with potential clients was during the interview. Mind you, by the end I had well over a decade of wedding photography experience, not to mention a degree in photography, and I'm teeming with wedding photography knowledge, so much so it's leaking out of my eyes. And I'm sitting here across the table from two people just starting to look into these top subjects, possibly for the first time in their lives. It's tempting to tell them everything I know. You should do this, you should do that, but that's not the best move. Do you know what it is? To ask informed questions, listen well to their answers, and use those answers to inform the next question. Follow the thread. Develop a clear picture in your mind. Understand their vision, their priorities, and what is at stake for them.
You've all heard this adage at some point, but you never get a second chance to make a first impression, whether that's a new team, whether that's a new customer, whether that's a new project. We all want to get things off on the right foot. How do we get things going? How do we get things going off to a rocking good start? I guess we ask the folks next door. They clearly are doing something. A lot of what this boils down to is empathy. You know, it's being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes and understand what they're feeling. You know, and I know how hard that can be for many of us to take ourselves out of our own head and put ourselves into someone else's. Now, while we say that metaphorically, please do keep your shoes on. Although I know more than a few presenters who like to do this job barefoot. I haven't quite ever figured that out, but you know, to each their own. One of the biggest challenges you run into is making assumptions. This is something I know I've done on projects. We have to be very, very cautious here. It's really easy for us to lose credibility. We have to guard that jealously. We build trust by listening, and I know that doesn't come easily, certainly to me, for sure. And of course, that means we have to be quiet. We have to let them speak. It can't be the game of, I'm just waiting for you to pause so that I can now interject my part of the conversation.
So, as I mentioned, I began my time with my clients by asking questions. This applies to both software and weddings. Sometimes the clients would come to me with a clear vision. Sometimes my questions help them develop one. Sometimes my questions expose differences of opinions between the stakeholders. This is all great. It's a healthy and productive conversation, and it's good to have it at the beginning. Then, both as a wedding photographer and on a software project, only after I have that clear vision of how they want their experience to go, only then do I start showing them my work. And I choose to show them work that is relevant to their goals. Now, I want to make two main points here. First, whenever possible, show, don't tell. Actions speak so much louder than words. This is your chance to demonstrate that you were listening and that you understand their wants and their needs. The second point is, don't always show the latest and greatest or the project that you consider to be your personal best. Consider their needs. I'm not going to show photographs of a 300-person luxury hotel wedding to a couple who's going to have a 15-person ceremony in their backyard. Likewise, I wouldn't want to present a whole event-driven architecture solution to a client who only has messaging between two microservices.
So the challenge for us is to ask good questions. What do you use today? What do you like about what you use today? What don't you like about what you use today? What's holding you back? What takes too long? What has too many clicks, too many steps, is too complicated? Did we get the defaults right? It's amazing how often we assume this. I had a student of mine once who told me a story. He said that he was sitting with one of his customers, was showing off some new feature, and the very first thing the customer did was undo all the defaults that they had set. And so my student said, well, hang on a sec, aren't those the right defaults? And the customer said, oh, heck no. We always undo all that. And my student was obviously very upset about it. Well, not upset, but he was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. And so he ran back to his desk, he changed the configuration, pushed it, came back, said refresh. And now the defaults were right. And the customer's like, oh my God, you listened to me, and this is what we want. This is what we need. You know, this is an opportunity for you to show your expertise. You know, again, show, don't tell. Or to put it another way, tell me you're a developer without telling me you're a developer. Now, everyone in this room has deep technical understanding, right? We live and breathe this stuff. It's what we love to do. You've got all this information, and it's so tempting for us to just want to like throw it all in your face and be like, here's all this cool stuff I know. And sometimes it's our way of trying to establish that credibility. I'm really smart. I know what I'm talking about. Here's some buzzwords. Take a deep breath, relax. You got plenty of time to get into it. You will. First step is for us to learn. We only learn by listening. What we're trying to get to is this point where they come to you and are asking your opinion. We want to be trusted advisors to our customers. That was always my goal as an architect, was to get to that stage with my clients where they looked at me as a trusted advisor, right? And then it's on us to then strategically deploy that when it is relevant to our customers.
So I generally didn't talk to new clients about the technical details of photography, and believe me, there's mountains of technical details. Instead, I let my work speak for itself. But there are times when I did talk tech, and I would educate as a part of selling. If a couple's wedding had a component that was technically difficult to photograph, like a ceremony in a particularly small, dark room with no natural light, not unlike where we are now, I would talk about that difficulty. I would teach them what made it hard, and I would tell them what I would do to solve the problem. Then I would show results. I would show examples of photographs using that methodology. Besides building trust, educating about relevant technical details has other benefits. First, in software, if and when the client does some research and solutioning without your direct guidance, that never happens, this will empower them to avoid pitfalls and avoid taking the project off track. Or if you're still in the selling phase, now the client will ask other potential vendors what they would do to solve this problem and ask to see examples. In wedding photography, I would go so far as to directly suggest that my couples do this, that they ask to see examples of other photographers' work that solve this problem. Wedding couples generally interview three photographers before hiring one for their big day. So statistically, I should have booked at about 33%, but I booked at 90%. I had this success because I made my clients feel heard and understood. I demonstrated my knowledge by asking informed questions and by showing work that is relevant to their experience.
Our job ultimately is to educate. I think that's basically my job. I get to try to teach people these things. And so it's up to us to teach our customers what they need to know about our technologies. It's easy to look insecure in some of these situations, and it's really, really important that we be able to take our technical knowledge and turn that into language they understand. How do we make this relatable to them? How do we make it so they can make that connection between what this does for them? Which means we've got to avoid the jargon and the techno talk. And that's part of how you know who's in the tribe, and it's one of the things we love to do, throw those terms around, and gosh knows there's a lot of them in this industry. We work with the spring folks pretty closely, and I always have to remind myself that to most of the people on this planet, spring is a season. It is not, in fact, a Java framework. So it is important for us to be able to take our technical knowledge and put it into terms that they understand. We have to understand their domains. I spent a long time working with investments folks, and I had to have them explain like tranches to me more times than I care to admit, and it just never quite clicked in for me. And so we have to remember that our customers have this jargon as well. And I think, frankly, a glossary is one of the most powerful artifacts you can have on a project to make sure we're all on the same page about what this stuff means. Be very, very careful with buzzwords. We've all played buzzword bingo. I actually found out about halfway through my last semester that my students had made a buzzword bingo card for me, which I think means I need new stories, because clearly I say a lot of the same stuff over and over again. Unsurprisingly, coffee was a major component of their buzzword bingo cards for me. Our customers don't know these things. They shouldn't know these things. One of the most depressing conversations I ever had with one of my VPs was when she was telling me she finally got her peer on the customer side to stop asking about WSDLs. And of course, my reaction was, why is someone on the business side even aware there is such a thing as WSDLs? This is not something they should be dealing with. That's our job. So how do we inform them of these things in a way that's interesting and relatable to them and their domains and their world? Again, don't make assumptions. This gets us in trouble all the time. What we can do is show them similar things that we've worked on in the past or similar things that exist in the universe. There's a pretty good chance that you've not encountered this exact scenario, but we can probably get close. And so this is also an opportunity for you to validate to your customer, I was listening. I heard what you said. I was actually paying attention. Amazing. This gives us an opportunity to ask the right questions at the right time. If you're going to go work with a new personal trainer, they should be asking you about your goals, about your injury history, about what things you like to do, what things you don't like to do, what's your diet like. If they're not asking those kinds of questions, that's not someone you want to work with. It's a chance for us to play trust but verify and challenge your own assumptions. Now, another one of the parts of this industry that's a little frustrating when you first get into it is you have to realize we're all selling even if we're not on the sales team. And so we all have to be embodying that always be closing mindset. Now, obviously, we're selling to a different group of consumers than pure salespeople. We're selling our designs to our peers. We think this is the right way to do this. We're selling this to our managers to say, hey, please give me a promotion or a raise or a bonus. And we're obviously selling this to our customers that we know what we're doing and we actually have your best interest in mind. The goal here is to win that trust with those customers. Now, one of the big challenges we face is we don't always get direct access to our end users. This has been a perennial issue in software. I was actually talking with our colleague Cote this morning about this, that there's this gap between the people who pay for software and the people who use the software. And this is part of the reason why software tends to be less than good, not as good as it could be. Now, beginning in my career, it was very stark. It was, oh no, we don't want you developer people talking to the customers. So if you've ever seen Office Space, I take the requirements from the fax machine and I bring them to the developers because I have people skills. And I was always kind of offended by that. Like, why not? I mean, I get along with people pretty well. I mean, maybe my wife would disagree, but I think I'm okay at this people thing. It gives us a chance to collect information. That's what we're striving to do here. It's not as hard as it seems. We just have to get the ball rolling and give people an opportunity to talk. Most people love to talk if we give them the chance. So ask good questions, ask follow-up questions, keep giving them these opportunities to give you more information. They give you an answer, ask more questions about that answer, and see where that thread goes, rinse and repeat. It's amazing what they'll tell you if you give them the opportunity.
Okay, so we've built trust by asking great questions and by showing them work that's relevant to their wedding or software experience that they want to have. What's next? The next way you can build trust is with a hands-on experience. For example, my wedding packages included a free engagement session. This had two major benefits. First, I built trust by having them experience my process firsthand and with stellar results. And when I first started in tech, I was surprised to see a similar thing happens. I used to be on a pre-sales team where we would build proof of concepts with new or potential software clients. This took the form of implementing the minimal viable software solution in a neutral cloud environment. And this way we could demonstrate expertise, show off the product, and give the customer a hands-on experience before doing the work of getting it into production. Second, with both wedding photography and with software, I identified problems early before they became problems. In photography, these were often problems of self-perception. For example, discovering that a groom is sensitive about his forehead looking too large. But I don't judge people or how they look. I'm not judging how he looks. To me, he's just a normal guy with a normal forehead, so I don't see it without him telling me. And he wouldn't have told me if we didn't go through this engagement session process. So this taste test experience likely saved me from having him decide he didn't like all of his wedding day photographs. Software is the same. By making a relevant demo on time and with stellar results and with excellent communication, we're able to build a lot of trust. And just like with wedding photography, in many cases, we're able to identify problems before they become problems.
For the record, I can relate to that forehead thing. My kid takes great joy in pointing out that I had more hair when I was younger, and I keep reminding him that this is your future too, and he doesn't like that. So this also, again, gives us a chance to demonstrate that we've listened. It's also a chance for us to show that we're experts in this field. Now, this happens a lot. You may be underestimated. That comes with the territory. Don't take that personally. You will prove yourself over time.
Imagine you're the subject in this photo. Your wedding photographer is asking you to stand by this boring white wall while she crouches next to a rusty metal handrail, camera pointed your way. What the heck is she doing? During an engagement session, this moment or moments like these are low stakes, so my couples wouldn't question me too much. And then later, when the results are compelling and offbeat and stylish, now they really trust me.
Again, this is an opportunity to show your expertise, which has way more power than you saying, I'm really good at this, I'm really smart, I really know my tech. The other thing you got to remember is, in this room collectively, we've worked on, dozens, hundreds of applications. We've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. We've been on projects far more often than our customers. For most of our customers, this is like the one shot they get in their career to build a new piece of software. For us, it's a Tuesday. We can get jaded. There's no getting around that.
Oh my gosh, I photographed so many weddings. I did the math once, and my best guess is I've been to over 500 weddings. And to be completely honest, I got sick of them. I don't care what colors they choose. I don't care how cute the flower girl is, or that the groomsmen have bow ties, or how many tiers the wedding cake has. I've been there, done that. I'm so over it. But my wedding couples never had a clue that I felt that way. I never lost sight of the fact that to them, this is one of the most important days of their lives. I complimented their creativity and taste, and I gushed over their wedding details. And I meant it. I wasn't lying. I meant it. I was very, truly happy for them, and I mirrored their excitement.
In other words, put yourself in their shoes. This is really what we're talking about here in terms of empathy. So yes, it is another day for you, but for them it isn't. It's a big deal for them. And one of the things that Whitney and I were talking about as we were building this out is it's a lot like your favorite band. They've got that hit song or those few songs that if you go to their concert and they don't play that song, oh, you're going to be disappointed. But you know how many times they've played that song, and you know how sick and tired they are of that song, and the last thing they want to do is play it. But they know in the back of their heads, you know what, we have to, so how do we make it interesting for us? Well, you try to do it for that person in the audience who's never seen it live before. And you put yourself in their shoes and say, I'm doing it for that person. Yeah, I know, I'm so tired of this, but that person hasn't seen it live, so I'm going to do a good job for them. This is a chance for us to educate our stakeholders. Now, it's so tempting in this line of work to go fast. We're always in a hurry. And I've never quite understood that. My wife's a business analyst, and I cannot tell you how many times I've heard some variation of, well, the developers started building stuff before we had requirements because, well, they were available, so they just started building stuff because management couldn't stand that they were sitting there for a week. And then what do we do with all the stuff they built? We throw it away because it's not even remotely close to what we need. And yet nobody seems to understand the waste that involves. Maybe just give them a week to, practice some stuff or watch some videos. There's so many things they could do that's more valuable with that time. This is one of my all-time favorite quotes. So this is Rich Hickey. This is the guy behind Clojure. Most of the big problems we have with software are problems of misconception. We do not have a good idea of what we're doing, and then we just go, 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 go. There is no testing regime. There is no type system that is going to catch problems of misconception. Happens all the time. A friend of mine told me he had an instance on a project where there was a difference between client and customer, and they didn't realize that until 4 or 5 iterations in. They thought they were synonyms. They weren't. Oops. They had to throw away a bunch of work because they made an assumption about these two terms. Again, I think a glossary is one of the most underrated, valuable things you can have on a project. Unsurprisingly, in many situations, the end user and the customer may not be aligned. Again, as I said earlier, the person buying the software is rarely the person using the software. That's especially true of enterprise things that we have to deal with on a regular basis. Now, this calls back to an experience I had early in my career. I did a green screen rewrite. I'm sure more than a few of you are familiar with these. We took an old mainframe app. We're going to put it on the web. Well, why? Because the manager wanted to make things simpler. The green screen required intimate knowledge of dozens and dozens and dozens of codes, region codes and office codes and investment codes. You had to be an expert on all that. And it also was not the most well put together system. Most fields were where they were because, well, it's a good fit. We had room here, so we put it here, not this is actually the logical place for it. And so who did we go to understand the old system? Well, a person who was an expert on it. And so we would sit and watch her, and I shadowed her quite a bit. And she was a super valuable source of information. There was more than a few times where I'd have to say, I'm sorry, could you do that more slowly? I couldn't see the screens you just went through. And she couldn't because it was all muscle memory for her. And I'd say, hang on, what key sequence did you just press? And she'd just kind of do like this Vulcan thing over the keyboard. And I'd have to oh, okay, all right, I think I got it now. So she was great in terms of being a source of knowledge. But it turns out she didn't want a new system. And this perplexed me at first. And it took me a little while for it to dawn on me as to why she was not as excited about this new system as I was. She was an expert on the existing system. As soon as I took the existing system away and gave her a new system, she was back at zero again. She wasn't the expert anymore. She was no different than someone we just hired. She didn't like that one bit. And so in ways both subtle and not, she pushed back hard on the project. She, in more than one meeting, said, people should just learn all the codes because that's what I did. Now, this is not a problem I can solve as a software engineer. There is no software solution to this problem. This was one of those things we had to push up the org chart and say, hey, you manager folks, do your job, rein this in. And that's what had to happen. Like her manager basically had to sit her down and have a, I'm sure, less than pleasant conversation. But it was a really valuable lesson to me as a young engineer that not everyone is rowing in the same direction, despite what we may think. All right, the next step is to talk about establishing...
Wait, can I just really like this. Is it cool if I talk about this one? Awesome,
by all
thanks.
means.
Tone matters, you guys. You can be the one to create excitement. Don't wait for it to come from someone else. You have control here. This photograph's gonna be amazing. I cannot wait for you to see. During a bridal portrait session, I asked this gorgeous bride to stand in this dingy, dirty little shack, and then I rolled myself into a ball, shooting from the ground. I must have seemed so strange, but the whole time I'm bubbling with excitement and encouragement. And then when I show her the result, I've built even more trust. They understand that I have a purpose and vision and expertise. You're going to love this. Then, on the actual wedding day, when I'm still acting like a weirdo and rolling around in the dirt, the couple gets it. They assure their wedding party, don't worry, she knows what she's doing. This is going to be awesome. And my excitement is transferred to them. I'm excited, the couple's excited, everyone in our orbit becomes excited. And in that way, during the actual project, the wedding day itself, I can leverage the credibility that I established earlier.
They then become your advocates. And that's incredibly powerful. You know, I certainly remember lots of times where I could try to ask for something, and just as an IT person, I got nowhere. But if I could get my customer to ask for it, they couldn't do it fast enough because they have a different relationship with IT than I do as a member of IT. So we want them to advocate on our behalf. We also need to understand that communication comes through different channels. The most obvious one is verbal, you know, the words that are coming out of our mouths. But then there's tone, there's how we say it. You know, this is what sarcasm is all about. This is why we need to come up with a defined way to say, what I'm about to type into Slack is sarcasm. Okay, sarcasm over. And then, of course, there's nonverbal. You know, one of the things that I learned, well, I mean, I knew this before the pandemic, but my family made it very aware to me is, you talk with your hands. I'm like, well, yeah, how else am I supposed to do this? The other weird thing about presenting in a pandemic is I think at this point, not only can my wife and son do about a third of my presentations, I think my cats could probably pull off one or two of them if I really needed to press them into service. There is the 7-38-55 rule, and that was invented by this person. And it basically boils down to how do we communicate our messages? 7% comes from words, what we say. 38% comes from tone, how we say it. 55% comes from body language. So absolutely, tone matters. If you want your customers to be excited, you have to be excited. You know, you have to project that excitement into the world if that's what you want back. You don't have to wait to be invited to the party. You have so much more control in these situations than you think. See, they're happy about it too.
That is the party.
That is the party next door.
Sorry,
Apparently that
guys.
started early. I thought that was later, but I must have gotten my schedule. See, I have a hard time with 24-hour time. You can actually control more than you realize. You actually can be a change agent. This is one of the things I love about our line of work, is bringing in new toys and trying to figure that out. So what's holding you back? What's preventing you from doing that? You know, you have to be willing to jump in. I mean, what is the worst thing that can possibly happen? It'll be okay, we'll get you a towel.
And the wedding photography cadence, so far we've knocked their socks off in the interview, given them a taste of what we can do with the engagement session. And then similarly with the software project, we've asked great questions and demonstrated that we were listening by building out the proof of concept. In each case, we built a good amount of trust. The next step is to clearly communicate our expectations about how the actual project should go, whether that is wedding day or whether it's creating a software solution that will eventually make it to production. The first major goal of planning is to set expectations. This will likely be another opportunity to educate your clients. For example, with weddings, I'd request the wedding day schedule, but I'd tie this request in with written advice about the amount of time I need to get everything documented optimally. If your client is working with a technology that's unfamiliar to them, they may appreciate some scaffolding rather than starting their solution from scratch. With wedding day photography, I would ask for a list of formal portraits. To help, I would provide an example list for them to work from, as well as some advice about how to make the process efficient. Then their job is simply to modify my example list to reflect the names and relationships of their loved ones. This has the added benefit of me receiving that information in exactly the format that makes the most sense to me. Finally, I would ask the wedding couple for a cast of characters, basically an explanation of who's in their family. Are their parents still together? Will their siblings be in attendance? Are the grandparents still around? That sort of thing. Just like in software, it helps me to understand why the portraits are what they are, not just what. Like, they could say they want a wedding day portrait of Bob, Alice, Trent, and Mallory. I have no idea who those people are, but if they say they want a wedding day portrait of the groom and his siblings, that makes a lot more sense. But really, in the end, I want both, the what and the why. The clearer my mental picture, the better. Having my wedding couples provide these three things, the wedding day schedule, the cast of characters, and the list of formal portraits, has an additional benefit. These documents together define what success looks like for the wedding day couple. With weddings and with software projects, it is important to define success, not only to ensure that everyone has the same goals, but also so that you have a source of truth you can refer to if things go awry.
Does that ever happen?
Never, not with either. The last point I want to make, everyone's always on time and do exactly what they say they're going to do. The last point I want to make here is that I would gather all of this information well before the wedding day. That way I could make sure I was set up for success. Is there enough time in the schedule to document all that the committed couples say is important to them? If not, I need to have a conversation with them and either procure more time or cut back on the list of portraits that they're asking for. It is easy to have that conversation in advance. It's much harder if you're asking them to make compromises on the wedding day itself. Okay, now we feel totally set up for success, but how are we meant to find those non-obvious expectations, like assumptions that they're making or details they simply forgot to mention? With weddings, I came up with a solution for this. It took me a shamefully long time to figure this out. Okay, this is what I did. I would directly ask.
No one could have predicted this.
I would ask, is there anything you would like me to photograph that wouldn't be immediately obvious to me? For example, are you carrying your grandfather's pocket watch? Are your mom and her siblings together for the first time in 10 years? Did you choose your venue because the field of wildflowers next door reminds you of your aunt who recently passed away? These are important things that as a wedding photographer new to the situation, I never could have guessed.
So now you have the lay of the land. It's time to actually apply that knowledge. So do you know what's important to your customers? Do you know what matters most for them? Do you know who all your stakeholders are? This is another place we get in trouble all the time, not truly identifying our stakeholders. You know, you may have heard something, but is that actually from the stakeholder, or is someone making an assumption about what the stakeholder wants? You know, so we need to understand who they are. Now, some of them are incredibly obvious. You know, in our wedding metaphor, the parents of the bride turn out to be important players in today's drama. There are others that's a little subtler. It's harder to maybe peel that out. You know, it turns out maybe grandma's actually really important because, well, she's paying for the whole thing. Others might not even be visible unless you look closely and you realize, oh, the dog must be important because they put it in the flowers. Now, some people would refer to these as level 2 players. So they're not directly involved, but they can absolutely hurt or harm your project. And their presence is felt. So if you've ever been in a meeting and someone utters some variation of, oh, the VP will never go for that. Okay, should we get her in the room then and ask her directly? You know, does the mere idea of someone get in the way? Are we worried about someone stepping on us in some way, shape, or form? You can't negotiate with a ghost. You can't negotiate with someone who's not in the room. This means we have to actively manage these stakeholders. And we also have to understand that not all stakeholders are created equally. So in my previous company, we actually talked about this in terms of power and interest. And so we looked at it in terms of low power, low interest, high interest, and we used this matrix to help us understand where, as architects, should we be spending our time. It should be obvious that low power, low interest people are not your major focus. That is not where you're going to spend all of your time. High power, high interest, yes, we will get you whatever you want, even if that's an extra cover on your TPS report. So we'll get you whatever you need. So we have to understand this matrix. Now, obviously, high power, low interest people are fairly useful as well. So our job here is to keep them informed.
My way of dealing with high power, low interest people was with transparency. With weddings, this is often the person who's fitting the bill. With software, this is often the person who's fitting the bill.
Shocking.
They want to be assured that their money is being spent wisely, but they don't want or need to know every little detail. On software projects, I like to keep my Trello cards detailed and current. If this high-power, low-interest person suddenly popped up with questions, I could just point them to the card. Eventually, they'd learn they don't even have to ask me. They could just check the card anytime they had the urge to be updated. This would respect both their time and mine.
And half the time, by the way, they won't even look once they know you've got it covered. They just want to make sure that you're on top of it. Oh, you got the, okay, then I don't even need to follow up with it. It's just that comfort level of knowing that information is there if they want it. Again, respect their time, let them come to the information, being very conscious of their time. Now, you've probably had this experience where they seem low interest right up until the moment where they're very much not low interest.
Oh man, earlier I mentioned the question I would ask every couple, is there anything you want me to photograph that wouldn't be immediately obvious to me? Well, I started doing that because of this incident. It was a Texas wedding in a small town outside of Austin. The couple got married at their hometown church. And weeks later, when I proudly shared the finished photos, the bride's parents were livid. They were so upset with me. They were mad that I didn't take a photo of the bride and the groom alone together at the front of the church. Now, mind you, I took a photo of the bride alone at the front of the church, the groom alone at the front of the church, the wedding party at the front of the church, various family permutations at the front of the church. But the bride and the groom alone together, it was a beautiful day outside, and I decided to take those photographs outside. And whoa, the wrath of God. So this is an example of something that wouldn't be immediately obvious to me and was obvious to them. It's a big mistake.
It happens. It happens.
Afterwards, I reflected, how could I have avoided this conflict? The best solution I could come up with was to ask that direct question.
Shocking. So for us, is there anything special we need to know about this situation? And a lot of this boils down to, again, transparency and making sure we're communicating. I know we keep kind of saying the same words over and over again, but that's, deliberate. Obviously, we care about high power, high interest folks. This is an absolute key to our success. Now, as we've already stated, some of these are really obvious, others not so much. Sometimes they're so busy they can't give you the time that you need, and that's its own set of challenges. We cannot afford to ignore these people. In many cases, they can show up at the last minute and completely unwind everything you've done, whether that's for a couple hours or a couple weeks. They can just make that all go away. So you need to be proactive. You need to engage with them early and often. What is the best way for us to work together? How can we get your input? That does require us to have this straightforward conversation. And I know, at least if you're like me, you tend to be a little more passive and just wait for it to come to you. That does not work well in these situations. I know most of us have been trained that if I type a command in and I get no response, life is good. It turns out silence is not always golden. I hear this a lot from my wife. It turns out sometimes silence is a very bad thing for me. These folks may not check in as often as you would like or as often as you need. So how do we keep them informed? Again, what works best for them? Is it a high-level weekly summary? Is it some kind of digest thing they can check whenever they want? What works for them, respecting their time? Now that leaves us the final quadrant, and it's very tempting to look at people who are high interest, low power and say, well, I don't care about you at all. You can't do anything to my project. That's a bad idea.
Low power, high interest folks in weddings are great. They often have so much love for the committed couple, and they're looking for ways to help. They want to express that affection with acts of service. And they're looking for a sense of importance. It is true with software too. Low power, high interest people are often seeking a sense of importance. When we find ways that these people can help, it can be a win-win. At a wedding, perhaps I need someone to go fetch Uncle Prem from cocktail hour to go be in a photograph, or someone to help carry the bride's dress as we walk to the next photo location. In software, a low-power, high-interest person might be someone new to the technology and is excited to learn. Or they might be someone who's affected by the changes you're making and who feels really anxious about it. Get them involved. Help them feel seen and heard and like they're contributing. Ask them to review some documentation you've written or to pair program with you while you debug.
Yeah, these folks are extremely useful. Take advantage of their passion. That enthusiasm can be incredibly contagious. They can, again, act as an advocate on your behalf. They will often volunteer to help you with things. Hey, can I shadow you for a couple of hours? Can I interview you about this feature? Could you test this for us for a couple of hours? Can I get your thoughts on how we should solve this? There is a constant pile of toil in our world, and somebody has to do that, even if it's not glamorous. Do not turn away people who want to help. Disregard them at your own peril.
So I've made this mistake. One wedding, I was just shooting the family portraits, working from the list that my clients gave me, and I didn't notice anything amiss. Once the final wedding photographs were delivered, I got a phone call. It was the groom's mom, and she was sobbing. She was devastated that she wasn't in many family portraits and not in many photos in general. And of course, I was like, oh, well, I arranged the family groupings based on what the bride and groom told me, which of course to her, it made it worse. Her son doesn't love her. He loves his dad's new wife more. The new wife is in more photographs than the groom's own mother. Now, clearly, this is a deeper problem that has nothing to do with me or with photography, and ultimately, interactions like these are what made me run away from the wedding photography profession like a bat out of hell. But I can't help but think if I had noticed the groom's mom on the wedding day and had taken steps then to make her feel important, perhaps this whole situation could have been avoided.
Obviously, you're unlikely to have that particular drama on a project, although I have seen similar things.
If you have any stories of sobbing on a software project, let's talk about those later at the party.
Yeah. Absolutely. And clearly, she needs to have a conversation with her son, but that's a different problem. These folks can absolutely sabotage the project. All right, they can work against your interests if you're not careful. So it's vital that we understand our stakeholders and understand what's important to them, what's their background, what wakes them up in the middle of the night, what are they influenced by? Is it CIO magazine type stuff? Is it Gartner Magic Quadrant stuff? Who do they listen to? One of the hardest things I learned was how to influence the influencers. I like to think I can just come in, make my case, and of course you're going to do what I want you to do. It took me a while to realize in many cases we have to use indirection to get what we want. That we have to figure out how to influence someone else who has the power. We don't always have that direct line of communication. Don't be afraid to ask direct questions. We do want to be aware of any red flags as we go along. Is there some conflict that we need to navigate? And sometimes we don't find out till it's too late. I was at one company where it turns out two of the founders hadn't spoken to each other in like 9 months. They couldn't even be in the same room with each other. I didn't find out about this till about 6 months after I left. Needless to say, that caused some issues at that organization. Does it turn out these two people have some history that's not so great? Once we have that trust, we can start asking some of these direct questions. And it's in our best interest to avoid sort of stirring up the hornet's nest if we can. A lot of times, it's as simple as listening. In many cases, people just want to be heard. So give them that chance. We may not be able to fix the problem, but if we give you a chance to talk about it, that diffuses a lot of the emotion. So we should be willing to do that. We have to make sure that we communicate our expectations.
So as I mentioned earlier, well before the wedding day, I would collect information from the committed couple to double check that there's enough time in the schedule to document everything that the committed couple said was important to them. If not, I would need to have a conversation with them about compromises. Do you have a large extended family and want to include them in 100 different various family portrait permutations? That's fine, yes. But it means we either need to build more time into the schedule or we need to reduce the amount of artistic portraits of just the couple. Do you want professional photos of the sparkler exit of the very bitter end of the night? Great, let's do it. Yes, but it does mean you're going to have to keep the photographers on the clock for an additional 2 hours of drunken dancing photos, which I guarantee are not as cute as you feel in the moment.
So the challenge for us is helping them understand these trade-offs. If you want this, then you're going to have to give up that. That will cost you time or money or both. And this is where we have to understand our customers' priorities. At some point, you've heard the product management adage of, good, cheap, fast, pick two. So if speed's a priority on this project, that's fine, but you're going to have to cut scope or be ready for, some quality problems or give me more money. Oh, we can't budge on cost? All right, well, some features are not going to make to the valley beyond, and we probably are going to have to give you lower quality software than we'd like. Although, frankly, I never advocate for lower quality software. That tends to bite us much harder later than we expect it to. It's all about trade-offs. This is one of the things that I didn't realize when I first got into this industry. There is no best solution. There is no best architecture. There's a lot of least worst ways of doing something. But we have to get comfortable with the fact that there is no, should we do A or B? You could do either. It's up to you. And the challenge for us is communicating to our customers how we're balancing these trade-offs. I mean, that's the art of what we do as architects when we're designing software, is understanding that tension and trying to get it right. So one of the questions that I get a lot is, should I replicate across multiple data centers? Is that something I need? And usually it comes up after Amazon East 1 goes down for a couple hours and takes like a third of the internet with it. And everybody's like, oh my gosh, they should have had redundant backup in place. Why didn't they have redundant backup in place? Those developers were bad. You know what? There's 3 answers to every question that I've encountered in computer science. The first is 42. That's to see who's well read. My favorite as an architect is another layer of indirection. But the answer that I have to give so often, a friend of mine actually had a t-shirt made with it, is it depends. I told my grad students this last fall, I said, the answer to everything I'm going to ask you this semester is it depends. And boy, did they snap onto that immediately. They picked up on that much quicker than I expected them to. Now, a lot of people get mad when you say it depends because they think you're trying to end the conversation. It's not the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of the conversation. I need more data. Tell me more about your situation. So redundant backup. All right, how much would it have cost them to have redundant backup in place? That's not free. That takes some effort, whether that's us engineering-wise, extra cost for procuring another provider potentially. And in some cases, that is the right choice. I remember at Spring One, this was in Austin, seeing one of our customers switch over from one cloud provider to another in a keynote while asking people to hammer on their search and then watch as all the traffic flowed over. Now, they needed that because they're an online retailer, while they have bricks and mortars as well. But for them, that's a business requirement. We can't go down because people will go buy stuff from one of our competitors. So they were willing to pay that price. But you have to balance that against, well, how much revenue would you lose if you were down for 2 hours? For a lot of applications, you know what? The cost benefit here is we're going to be down for a couple hours for this thing that happens once a year, once every 2 years, once every 3 years. That's probably a trade-off we'd be willing to make in many situations. So we have to be able to explain that to our customers. This isn't a no. It's a, if you want that, then we need this. And it's our opportunity to negotiate some of these priorities. Now, that doesn't always work as well as you'd like. I was on one project where a customer gave us this massive list of requirements. And so we kind of looked at it, digested it, and realized there is no way we can do this in the time and budget you've given us. And so we pushed back and said, Joe, you need to prioritize. We explained to him, you have not given us enough money or time. And he said, oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. So a few days later, he came back with his new improved prioritized list. He was so proud of it. And he said, all right, folks, here's my 1s and my 1As. And we all looked at him and said, I do not think you understood what we were asking you to do. Now, this is frustrating because I would just like to communicate this to you and have you do it. Our job is to present options. Our job is to offer advice, the best advice we can. We do not, in fact, have unlimited time and budget. And by the way, that doesn't work well. There's a fantastic book that shows out what happens when you have unlimited time and unlimited budget. It does not end the way we would hope. It is about us telling our customers, these are the trade-offs. Now, it's their choice. They can do what they want. We can practice influence and try to get them to do what we want them to do. And of course, you may not agree with their decisions. So I live in Minnesota. It gets very cold there in the winter, so anytime I see someone's tongues getting close to a block of ice, I think that's a bad idea. Been there, done that. You know, that's always the running joke at recess. Here, little Timmy, lick this metal pole. And then it ends badly for little Timmy. But you know what? People sign out against medical advice all the time. You can't take it personally. That's not our job. So we do the best we can. We present, hey, if you want this, this is what you have to give up. We shed light on these problems as best we can. The decisions are almost always made further up the food chain than us. But our goal here is to establish some ownership so they understand the consequences. They know what's at stake here. And we can just take solace in the fact that I gave you the best advice I could. You chose to ignore it. All right, I'm not going to take it personally. If we did a good job establishing those priorities early on, we can avoid some of these issues. You know, so when someone pushes back, you can say, well, hang on a sec. When we had this conversation with the VP, she said this was a priority. You are now saying it's not. How should we proceed? If we've done this well in the beginning, we don't have to be the bad cop. If we have these invested decision makers, they'll be the ones who step in and say, nope, that's not a priority. We established that already. Again, it's not a hard no. It's all about trade-offs. How do we move forward in this situation? In a perfect world, we make it their idea, right? This is the heart of influence. How do I make you think it's your idea, right? Now, there's two basic ways to try to get somebody to do something. That's the hammer, and that's the ninja. All right, I'll tell you a story about my son to help you kind of establish what I'm trying to say here. So my boy's 15 now. He loves the fact that he's taller than me. He thinks that's pretty cool. I keep reminding him, yeah, but I'm still stronger than you are. At least for another year or two, and then that'll go out the window as well. But when he was much younger, the daycare center we took him to had a standing rule. Thou shalt wash your hands before being released in your general population. You know that little kids aren't the best when it comes to hygiene. Well, frankly, neither are teenagers. I don't know when that changes exactly. And so we would get there in the morning, and I'd look at my little son and say, hey, buddy, please go wash your hands. And the little 3-year-old Everett would just look at me and say, no. Now, I'm a little perplexed at this point. I'm not sure what to do. I mean, I've given a rather straightforward command, one that I've given him multiple times in the past. And so I repeat the request in case he didn't hear me. I say it a little louder, and I remind him of our relationship status in case he'd forgotten overnight. And I'd say, Everett, I'm your father. Go wash your hands. To which he would just cross his little arms and look at me and say, no, never. Now, I'm not quite sure what to do at this point. I have run out of things in my parenting toolkit. And this is when my wife steps in, proving she's so much better at this than I am. And she'd look at Everett and say, hey, buddy, I bet I can get my hands washed before you can. And she'd take one step towards the sink, and he'd run over and start washing his hands, laughing, ha ha, mommy, I'm going to beat you. And she would say, yes, you are. Turns out we can do the same thing if we are careful. If we do this right, we can actually shape the questions to give people the illusion of control. Right? So it's an old adage as a parent, well, do you want to take a bath or do you want to take a shower? You have a choice. It's not unlimited choice. What do you want?
So the wedding day is here, you guys. I can tell you love weddings just as much as I do, actually. You've established trust and a good reputation. You've asked a ton of questions, and you've rooted out potential problems. You've delivered quality work on time in small yet tangible ways. You've developed a great plan of action that everyone is happy with, and that plan has set you up for success. Now it's time to actually deliver. Now that the stakes are larger, you may encounter new people with strong opinions. For me, I look a lot younger than I am, so people I meet at this stage often underestimate me. But during a wedding or software project, I don't care what outside people think. I've already gained the trust of the people who matter. And often, stakeholders will go out of their way to vouch for me and to clear any obstacles. It is in their best interest for me to be able to be free to concentrate on the matter at hand and do the best job I possibly can for them.
So the moral of the story, there's going to be bumps in the road, sorry. You know, sometimes someone just wants to or needs to feel important, and there's certain personas that stick out. One that I've encountered more than once is the hobbyist. And these are people who often have like prosumer level stuff and they think they know what they're talking about. In our line of work, that tends to be the former IT person. And they know how to do your job, and they love to tell you over and over again, well, that's not how we used to do it, to which you just kind of roll your eyes, and at least I would utter some variant of, like, okay, waterfaller. I ran into this in one project where I had a client who decided that he needed to design the database, and so he recreated IMS, a hierarchical database, inside of DB2, a relational database, and we said repeatedly, this is a bad idea, don't do this. It got to the point where our VP took us aside and said, you two you have to stop, just let him do it. If you don't shut up, we'll remove you from the project. And I was kind of like, I'm okay with that. I don't really want to be a part of this train wreck, because what we knew was gonna happen happened like 9 times. And each time you had to drop the entire database and recreate the entire thing, because we found things that I didn't even know existed in Oracle. Like, you can only have so many keys before Oracle goes, you're wrong. It was just amazing. So this is frustrating, but you know what? Again, we give them the best advice we can. They're not always gonna listen. They're like teenagers that way. It's okay. Sometimes they need to feel the pain directly. That's what finally happened with the database. They spent so much money dropping and recreating it. Eventually they're like, okay, fine, you guys can design it the way you want. It helped that person had left, and so we were clear of that political issue. Don't let it ruin your day. I've wasted too much of my time about that. You do the best you can. You know what, if you charge by the hour, sure, no problem, happy to do that. Obviously, we all want a good outcome. If they insist on doing the wrong thing, there's not always a lot we can do about that. You'll run into insecure people as well. These are folks in negotiations who use I, me, and my a lot. That usually means, by the way, they're less powerful than they think they are. Conversely, when you hear people say we, they, and them, they tend to be more influential. They're deflecting to avoid being pinned down on anything. You will run into folks who just need to feel important. They need to feel that they're part of the action. Look at us, we're in the background. Cool. This happens a lot if you're using bleeding edge technology. You get a lot of folks who want to be associated with the project. Is there a way to give them a win that doesn't impact everything else? So with the right sort of framework in place, we can redirect them. That's a great question. By the way, we have an ADR that covers that already. Go ahead and review that and get back to me if that's not clear. You're going to repeat yourself. This is the rule of 3. You need to sell somebody something 3 times. So if we get them to agree 3 times, we've strengthened that dynamic. Now, I have on more than one occasion wanted to say, I told you so, like when my customer tried to recreate IMS. And you know what? It might make you feel slightly better in the moment. It's rarely productive in the long term, I'm sorry. And it's rarely appreciated, especially if you say it to their face. It does, by the way, turn into really good conference talks, just as a total aside. Just make sure you change the names to protect the survivors. That's one of the, I got to tell you, I've been amazed how many times I've given a presentation and someone's come up to me and said, where do you work? And I've told them, they're like, man, I could have sworn you worked for us because we had that same conversation last month. And I'm like, yeah, these things are a lot more universal than I'd like them to be. So we take it as a lesson learned. We perform a retrospective. How can I learn from this in the future? How can I avoid this in the future? How can I navigate this in the future? And again, if we're getting paid, okay, I guess I can't get too depressed about it. I've got some friends that use a sliding rate, right? So the longer the engagement, the lower the rate. The more painful you make this for me, the higher the rate. So if you're going to make me sign your paper, guess what? I'm going to go ahead and charge you more. So the easier you make it for me, the less I'll charge you. But it's your call. Despite our best intentions, software projects do not always end successfully. In fact, failure is rarely the result of a bad technology choice. It occasionally happens. We ignore people. We can't do that. Software projects are people projects. People are full of personalities, emotions, opinions. We need to take that into account. It comes with the paycheck. You can apply patterns to people as well. You just need to be prepared. Don't be afraid to reuse hard-earned knowledge, even if it comes from a non-traditional field. Thank you for hanging out with me. I really appreciate it. If you want to see more of us, we've got, of course, the amazing Enlightening.
I have a streaming show on Tanzu.tv where I stand behind a light board and invite an expert on to come teach me about a cloud concept, and I draw out my understanding as I go. It's really fun. The chat's very engaged, asks a lot of questions. I invite you to come join us.
You've got
I have
stickers?
some stickers. Come ask me for a sticker. I'll be around at the party tonight and stuff too. So
She's
please
got
say
Berglund
hi.
coming on soon, right?
I also am from Texas, and I know 0 people at the conference
Hook 'em
except for
horns.
this guy. So if you just want to say hi and be a friend.
That's how you know where someone is in Texas. You say hook 'em horns and see how they react.
Oh, except I'm not a sports ball person, and
But that's an Austin thing. Yeah,
Okay.
that tells you whether you're from Austin or from elsewhere. And if you want to see more of me, I do stuff on Twitch as well. I do an interview show, which is basically me trying to recreate the hallway track that I missed for so many weeks and months from conferences. So I usually interview some interesting person, and we just chat for an hour. It's just me throwing softball questions at them. And we're actually back on the road again. It's kind of nice. It's kind of nice.
Yeah.
So thank you, friends. I appreciate your time and attention.
you.
Cheers.